Welcome back, everyone. This is Ayad Boudiab, and we are proceeding with our discussion on Angular. In this exercise, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the data binding to see basically how we can use the binding expressions. I know we discussed that a little bit before, but we need to illustrate that a little bit further so we can be more and more familiar with it. In addition to that expression, I'd like to talk about the ng model and see how we can use that. And of course, we'll create our controller and be able to use the ng controller to be able to have that in the scope and be able to bind to that expression so we can display these things on the screen. So then I'm going to create everything on the same page. I will have the actual controller, and then up in the body, top of the div in here, I'll bind to that and then use the rest of the elements. Now, one thing that you will notice on the screen, in the body I have a div. Inside the div I have a form. The form contains a field set with a legend, publisher information, and then I have a label for the name, description, book title, book list. I'll put the rest of the information here as we progress through the exercise. Down here I have the script that references Angular, and then this is where we put the script for our Angular code. This is where we create the module and then add the controller to the module. And then up here on the top, you would see that I did not add my main app yet. And then one thing that I need to bring to your attention, I have a link in here for the bootstrap.min.css. Bootstrap is just CSS to be able to style my page a little bit nicer. You don't have to have Bootstrap, but it just simplifies the work a lot for you and make things really interesting and nice on the screen. If you are interested in learning more about Bootstrap, I have another course on Mr. Bull website that discusses Bootstrap in details. So you can reference that to learn more about it. But in this case, as you can see, I'm just referencing that to make the elements within the form look nicely formatted. That's all. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, under the label for the name, I will have a input box for the name. Okay, so we'll have input and then type equal text, and then let's put a placeholder in there equal name. That's about it for now. So that would represent the actual name for the user. And then let's go ahead and create another one for the description. Input type equal text, and also let's put a placeholder in here and make that placeholder, let's make sure we spell that correctly, equal, and then let's put in here description. And then let's close that. So now I have the name and description, but I also would like to have the book title in here, and the book titles would be a select. So let's make that a select, and also let's make that multiple. So the user would be able to select multiple options, which is multiple books in this case. So that would be equal to multiple. And again, that will be the actual select, and then in here /select, that's closed. And right now for the options, I'm just going to say option, and then I'm going to close the option tag and don't put anything for now. Now the book list that I have, that will be a text area in here. So let's create a text area. And that's the text area. Let's give it some rows, make that equal to 10. And then let's close the text area and then put a break. And then I have a submit button with the class btn. This class btn comes from Bootstrap, so it makes the button also look nice, and it's the submit button. So that's about it as far as the actual form is concerned. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's try to load it on the page. That's what I have so far. So I have the publisher information, name with a placeholder name, description, placeholder description, book titles, and then book list, and then you see the submit button down here. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and come back to the rest of the discussion, and let's go and see what we can do with the actual script so we can add our module and our controller. Inside the script, I have my var main app, and that will be equal to Angular dot module. Remember, that's the first thing that we need to start with, right? We need to create our module, and then off the module we create our controller. So this module in here will be main app, and then this, since this module does not depend on any other modules, there's nothing in the second parameter array. Before I forget, let's go ahead and copy this one and make sure that way up on the top inside the HTML we need to set ng-app equals the main app, right? So that's how we do this to make sure that we're using module would know, Angular would know what is the main app and what's the ng-app directive in here that we need to, where everything would be bootstrapped, right? And by the way, I'm using here bootstrap, different from the actual bootstrap that we're talking about for the CSS. All right, so now that will give me the main app. Now off the main app I need to create my controller, right? So main app dot controller, and I need to give a name for that controller. In this case I'm going to call it publisher controller. That will be a function. To that function I will inject the scope so I can add things to the scope, and then I'm going to put the rest of the body for that function. Now in here a few things that we can put. For example, we can add the like we've done before to the scope the actual publisher. So we do $scope, and then we make that equal to $scope dot publisher. So we can add items to the scope. They can be available for the page, right? The publisher in this case is a press, like we done before, and then in here I can continue with the rest of the information that I need for my scope. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here on the screen so I don't have to keep typing everything. So now I have this. The scope contains the books array. The books array contains array objects. Every one of those objects represent the title, the author, the release date, and the cost. Same thing for the rest. So 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, about 6 elements in the array, right? And the scope, the description will be this publisher has many IT books. So now I have added the actual publisher, all the books related to that publisher, and the description for that publisher on the scope. Now these elements are available on the scope, I should be able to refer to them, but there's one more change that I'll have to make before I'm able to do so. Let's go ahead and go up to the top in here of the page, because adding these does not affect the page yet, right? I don't know, I'm not referencing my controller, publisher controller. I'm not referencing that anywhere, so it won't be able to know what to bind to. So I'll have to go up here, up in the main div that's surrounding the form. I'd like to introduce my ng controller. By doing so, and I say, and this is my ng controller equals the publisher controller. Now, having added these into the scope for the publisher controller, now I should be able to bind to publisher, books, and description. I should be able to bind to them over here. Okay, so this is the concept of binding then. So what do I need, right? I have in here an input box for the name, an input box for the description, and then I have book titles with the select, and then I have the text area. Let's start with the first one being the name. Now I need to bind to that, and then I'll be able to use that name in the text box. So that way, if the actual source, which is in this case the publisher's name down in the controller. If that changes, then the input box would change, and if that input box would change, then the element in the scope would also change. So this is two-way binding, right? The two-way binding between the actual controller and the element binding to it. So now if I say in here ng model equal publisher, that would be the publisher that you saw here, right? So this is the one that I'm using, and this is two-way binding between this guy and that guy. Changes here reflected there, changes in the input box reflected here. Okay, so now that will take care of the actual publisher. Now I need to go with the description. Well, again, I'll have to do the same thing here. ng-model equal, and then I indicate my description in here. Okay, now for the select, I have the options, right? In here, for the select, it's multiple selection, but for the options, I need to keep looping until I get all the books. So definitely in here, I need to use my ng repeat, right? So I say ng repeat equal. In this case, I'm going to repeat all the books that's available here for all these books, right? So I would say, here's ng repeat, repeat book in books. By the way, this has to be the name of the element from here, but what you call this one is up to you, right? So this is like you're introducing a new variable. You're saying for each one of those books in the books array, now I need to, inside the option, I need to use the binding expression to refer to something from the books. Well, what do the books have? The books, every one of those books has a title, author, and release date and cost. So I can bind to any of those guys. Over here, I use my double curly braces binding expression, and since I named this guy book, I have to say in here book dot something. I'm going to refer to the title, so I'll say book dot title. That's how I bound to it. Now I have for the book list down here, I have a text area. Text area rows being 10, and then I need to put something in the text area. So for this text area, I'm going to put also a binding expression. Okay, now I can put the books in there. When I say books, that's the books array. That will be all the elements within the book, but I'm also being able to take advantage of the filters. So I can say, well, you know what? Take those books, pipe them into JSON. Now I have filtering them as JSON objects, and then they will be displayed in the text area. And then I will have the submit button, class button, and then submit. I don't want to change anything in there. So now let's go ahead and save and see what changes I would have on the screen. If I reload the page, I would see that the name Apress, it was bound to Apress as a name, right? That comes from the scope.publisher, that's Apress. This is scope.description, the publisher has many IT books. You notice in here that we bound to the books.titles. So now I have the elements over here, and since my option is multiple selection, I can hit the control key and keep selecting as many as I want, right? That's from the book title. And then down here, you would notice that we bound to the books array, and we put that as a JSON object, and you notice that everything from the books are being displayed here. So this is pretty much how we can work with metadata binding. Of course, we have the submit button down here, but there's no action taken on the submit. We'll see how we can work with actions on submit, also using the ng option, so we can be able to bind to a specific event and be able to trigger that event for the ng click in this case. But right now the button doesn't do anything with the form. So this is how I use data binding. Now I'm going to move to other examples. I'd like to talk a little bit more about validation, and then some Angular functions that they are could be handy in some situations. So let's go ahead and move to other subjects. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Ayab Boudiab, and you take